Okay.
We're back with another episode of How We Would Build This, a live show dedicated to helping business owners get candid, actionable feedback on the products and services they're building. This month, we're highlighting the show's host and co-founder, Chris Schultz, who is here to talk about his experience building 3 companies, Voodoo Ventures, Flatstack, and LaunchPad. So, Chris, can you kick us off by telling me about your investing journey at Voodoo Ventures?
I sure will. Yeah. And thank you, Lauren. It's a fun episode to have sort of the roles reversed. Usually I'm used to being in your seat where we're talking to guests about their journey. So this will be new for me today to be sort of on the hot seat. But I started investing, angel investing, a little more than 10 years ago, really just out of a desire, the same desire that, we've had with the other companies. It's just about helping entrepreneurs build businesses. And sort of the origin story for me was I had a friend and somebody who I'd gotten to know named Patrick Comer, who worked at LaunchPad. And he was working on raising some capital for a business that he was building. And I, had sort of been dabbling in venture capital and knew enough to know a few people. And so I told him I would help him raise his round. And we took a couple flights. We went up to New York, took some meetings there, went to Boston. We pitched the Kraft Group, the owners of the New England Patriots. We were at the stadium. We were overlooking the field, and had a lot of fun doing it. But of course, at the end of this, everybody said no, which is very common. And for any entrepreneur who's gone through the fundraising process, you get a lot more no's than yeses. And so one day we were standing outside LaunchPad, both sort of head hung low, and hey, this is tough going. And he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Chris, you know what? I don't want any of them to invest. I want you to invest." And for me, that was the first time that I thought I was a facilitator. I never thought of myself as an investor. I thought this was, the realm for people much more experienced and much more well-off than myself. But it was really about having some skin in the game and being a partner to Patrick as he was building his business. So I, wrote a check, tapped into, my 401k account and everything my mom would have, had a fit if she knew I was doing, and wrote a check. And that was the first angel investment that I ever made. And then, onward from there. But that was the start of the journey.
What was it about that product specifically that caught your attention and said, I want to write this check?
Yeah, it was really about getting to know Patrick on a very deep level. For me, angel investing, sometimes people try to make things, very, quantitative and very objective. The knock on angel investors is always that they're very emotional. And for me, I've leaned into that emotion. I invest in people I believe in, and that I can see that passion and that fire and the vision to do something really big and really amazing. And I guess if I've had success, it's been my ability to see that early. And, one of my core values is being a first believer. I was the first check into his company. I've been the first check into a lot of companies. But that's really a very emotional thing. It's about, finding an entrepreneur who you really feel has that spark and that vision, and then the wherewithal and the stick-to-itiveness to build something really big, right? It's often it's just a dream or an idea at the beginning. But it's, will this person be ready and able to scale themselves to where they have 10 employees, 100 employees, 1,000 employees? That's a big path and a big journey, and you're sort of making a decision at the very outset of it. So it's always been very much about the person herself for me.
And do you usually get all of those details up front? Or are you meeting with the entrepreneur and asking them about their long-term vision? Are you looking at their business plan? Is there like a set of goals that you look at that must be filled before you invest? Or is it really just a gut feeling that this person has vision and gets it?
I would say it's both. It's a gut vision. It's a gut feeling developed over time. There's an adage that investors invest in lines, not dots, so that you want to see somebody who's on a trajectory. Every time you meet with them, you have a deeper understanding, you're more bought in, you're more excited. If somebody doesn't have an ability to show progress and convey that they're making things happen, that there's momentum building, that's a bad sign. But if somebody has an ability to, every time you meet with them, you're more and more excited, that's a very positive sign. So, most of my investments have been people that I've met with multiple times over months, sometimes years. Occasionally it's a snap judgment. You just hear something that's so amazing and so compelling that I've said I'm in, but investors invest in lines, not dots.
And do you have a experience off the top of your head where you've had to pull out and say, this isn't for me? I've gone in too deep now, but I have to see that it's failing and acknowledge that and step away?
Well, I try to be very cautious about not being in until I am. So not sending the wrong signal. Investing is definitely about saying no a lot more than saying yes. There's everybody wants to raise capital. Very few businesses are ready or capable of raising capital, but all business ideas, I believe, are valid and worth pursuing. Some just may not be for me, or some may not be investable. So I always try to add a lot of value as much as I can in coaching and in feedback and in honesty. But I try not to get anybody's hopes up unless I'm really in. And if I say I'm in, I'm in. If I say I'm in, I'm going to write the check.
So how many years has Voodoo Ventures been around now?
Voodoo Ventures has been around almost 15 years, maybe a little more, since 2003. Yeah, more than 15 years. And so Voodoo Ventures is sort of my holding company, so to speak. I feel like we've done everything. We've incubated companies and product ideas. LaunchPad and Flatstack both came out of Voodoo Ventures. And then I also have run accelerator programs through LaunchPad. And then obviously done some angel investing. So it's been a great journey. I think, to be honest, the most successful things have been, being, either an operator and really being in on a business and running it like Flatstack, or being an investor and writing a check and being as value add as possible, but letting an entrepreneur going on their own journey. We can talk about some things that haven't worked, things that incubating ideas and trying to have other people run them is is really a difficult process. I had a company that we tried to start called Nico Nico, that we put a team around, but really didn't end up going anywhere. So certainly have as many losses as wins along the way, but that's the game we're in the startup world.
What's the biggest change you've seen in the 15 years since you started investing and now? Is it technological? Is it how investors are acting upon the market? Is it the companies that you're investing in are changing?
Well, I think the only constant is change. When I started doing this, I think I competed on bringing sort of a Silicon Valley ethos to New Orleans, and a lot of parts of the country did not have a true startup scene, right? There weren't things like accelerators and startup weekends, and there wasn't all the content about startups you can possibly imagine on YouTube and available just at the tip of your fingers. So it was very new at that time. So, at that time it was sort of like Chris was the only guy doing it in New Orleans. And so you went to Chris. Since then, the startup world has in a wonderful way, has totally democratized itself, and you can start a startup from anywhere, not just in the US, but globally, build great companies anywhere. And that's been a particular passion and focus of the work that we've done, particularly through LaunchPad. So I think that it's become much easier to start a company. The tools and technology, everything, costs keep coming down. Things like things that over one cycle are just taken as doctrine. Like, you have to build a startup. You have to be in Silicon Valley to build a startup. You should never outsource your core technology. Wait a couple of years and that'll change. And we've been ahead of the curve on a lot of those things, both with LaunchPad and with Flatstack. But the end game, whether with all of those inputs, is still the same thing. In order to be successful building a company that is a company that investors care about and want to participate in and ultimately will get a return from, you have to build a really big company. You have to build something really successful. And, that core essence, I don't think has changed from the standpoint of my lens as an angel investor. Is this person capable of being the CEO of a 500-person company? Is the market big enough that this can be $100 million company? Those are the types of companies that angel investors look for. And it doesn't mean that building a $5 million company or a $10 million company is not valid. You should go pursue that. Those are the types of companies that I've built. I haven't built $100 million companies, but having a company that is a very large company with hundreds of employees is a path that once you set out on that path, you're on a trajectory, and you got to maintain that trajectory, and it's really hard. But those are the types of companies that are big wins for investors.
Well, this is a good transition into your next company, which LaunchPad you started, and I'm wondering how that came to be. Was it to keep your finger on the pulse and support entrepreneurs in your community? And what other kind of reasons did you have for starting that company?
I mean, definitely both of those. My interest has always been, I guess I would describe as very pure. I love being around entrepreneurs. I want to support entrepreneurs. I want more people to be entrepreneurs and feel like they can be successful. So, at the beginning, it was really just about bringing together a community. There were, this was in New Orleans, post-Katrina, and a lot of people had left New Orleans. A dedicated few had stayed. And one of the things that we were really passionate about was making sure that New Orleans we just didn't build back to what it once was, but what it could be and what we wanted it to be, which for a lot of us was, we wanted a tech community. We wanted a startup community. And we had meetup groups and, Bar Camp and Net Squared and different organizations, Startup Weekend. But the co-working movement was getting started at that time. And, the idea was just, what if we could all work together every day instead of just coming together on Saturday and Sunday for a startup weekend once a year? And, we were the first co-working space in New Orleans. We were actually one of the first co-working spaces in the country. I went out to a space called Citizen Space in San Francisco, in Newark City in New York. We started LaunchPad before WeWork started. So this was not a time when co-working was actually very familiar to people. And it was super fun. Anybody who was building anything showed up there. Everybody worked all day, and then a bar opened up next door, and we had beers at night and meetup groups and hung out and talked tech and geeked out. And, it was a lot of fun. And really, it was about entrepreneurs and builders and technologists all, being around each other and supporting each other.
And this has now changed, this vision, since COVID. And what have you had to do to pivot your business?
Yeah, COVID has absolutely been a challenge. We focused our first 8 years of the company on New Orleans. And then about 3 years ago, decided to begin to take the vision to other markets, what we call momentum markets, mid-market cities that have a growing entrepreneurship ecosystem, but not necessarily a hub. So we opened in 5 different cities across the country. And, we were sort of, on this startup journey on a great growth trajectory. About a year ago, when the doors slammed shut on, metaphorically and literally on most physical businesses around the country, they slammed shut on us, and the spaces have been sort of, open, but on, very, very limited attendance, and most people obviously have been at home and shelter in place during this time. So it's been a challenging time for the business. We pivoted to a lot of online and virtual community building and programming. We run, an accelerator program for entrepreneurs and residents that we do all of the content virtually like this. We're excited about, people are starting to come back to the spaces, and we'll be able to start doing content again, physically, but we're, the world has changed. And I think it's in a lot of ways, the flexibility that people have will be good for our model and our market. People maybe, have more flexibility and certainly want to get out of the house after the last year and get to a co-working space. But it's no longer, a new idea. It's going to be very competitive, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But hopefully, in my experience, technology and, the economy has, works in cycles, and it's usually in the most challenging time when sort of the tide goes out and all the MBAs leave. I'm an MBA, so I can say that. They all scurry off and head out of technology, and all the geeks remain. I'm also a geek, so I can say that. That's the most interesting and sort of fertile time in the startup world. And so I feel like even though it's been, a tough time, that there's a lot of interesting innovation that will be coming out of this. And, we'll figure out our role in that.
Definitely. And one of the strategic moves that you've made in the last year was that you stepped down as CEO, and your wife, Anne, took over the reins of the business. And why did you do that? What made you guys decide that as a couple?
Well, earlier in our conversation, we were talking about what I look for is as an investor in an entrepreneur who is really capable of building a great company as a CEO. And I think I saw that more in Anne than I see it in myself. I certainly, am proud of, my abilities and experience. But Anne, worked at Google. She's been, a C-level executive at a lot of startups, funded startups in the Bay Area. She's had a lot of great experience, and she was the right leader for LaunchPad. And she's been phenomenal. She, has really, a lot of respect and admiration and camaraderie with the team. She's a leader. She's done a great job sort of executing on this, and me moving into more of a supporting role. And it's also, the truth is, it's gotten me back to what I actually am most passionate about. Which is, being around and with entrepreneurs, talking to people who are building their businesses, being at the very early stage of things. I'm never built LaunchPad, with the aspiration to become a real estate executive. As the business has grown, we spend a lot of time in the real estate world, and that's important to our business. But I care about entrepreneurs more than I care about real estate. So it's allowed me to play a role in the company that, as chief community officer, that lets me focus on the people, our customers, and the people that I want to focus on, and help make them as successful as possible.
Yep. And what's one piece of advice you can give to other couples that work together, live together, thrive together, keeping work and love separate, or is it all intertwined and you just can't get away from it? What keeps you guys sane?
Well, we could write a book on that, and it wouldn't necessarily be right. It would just be what we've done. We were just having lunch together before the interview, and got into a disagreement, and sort of hashed it out. But you have to be able to do that. I think that that ability to have an argument, have a disagreement, but get through it and respect each other. We described our journey as the first step was realizing that we wanted to be on the same path and the same journey, and was working at a lot of Silicon Valley startups, had a lot of success, and we both are sort of enjoy business and enjoy talking about it. So we'd find ourselves in the evening, talking about, business and companies. And I finally said to her one day, I said, look, you already own 50% of this company. We've both been through a divorce, so I know we're in a community property state. You own 50% of LaunchPad. Why are we sitting here spending time talking about these other startups that you own 0.25% of? You should just come join LaunchPad and we can be on the same journey. And so that was the first step, just making the decision to work together, which obviously then, there's a lot more risk. The ups and downs were going together. We're definitely not as diversified in our financial aspects of our life, but we began to get to travel together. We ultimately have had a baby, and moved to Healdsburg, where we're sort of working remotely. We don't actually have to be in San Francisco anymore. So we described that whole phase of the journey as going all in, and just being like, let's do this. Let's move without worrying about what the safety net is. Let's go all in together. and push the chips all in and go for it. So that, I think, is the first sort of step of making a decision to work together as a married couple. And it means you obviously are going to spend even more time than you already spend with your spouse or partner together and talking about, you have to be able to balance, talking about work with talking about other aspects of your life. But then the other area that we focused on was what we like to call work-life integration. A lot of people talk about work-life balance, and that to me sort of is like, okay, I compartmentalize, this is my work life, I leave it there. When I go home, I don't think about it, I don't talk about it, I don't check my email, which is fine. That's a good approach, and that's okay. And whether you have balance or whether, as we approach it, we have integration, is fine. We have started a ritual this spring as the weather has gotten a little nicer. We block off 2 or 3 hours on Monday, and we go for a hike and we take a picnic lunch and we talk about work the whole time. And that's our weekly planning meeting. And it's a lot more fun to go have our weekly planning meeting going for a hike around Lake Sonoma than it is, sitting on a Zoom call with, your executive on the other side of the country. So the integration of work and life has been another aspect that we've focused on and made it work for us. That doesn't mean working all the time, but finding ways to integrate your work into your life.
Well, I think you're right that this could make a whole nother episode, and I think that we should take note of that, because there's a lot of insights to be had about how to make your relationship and your work smoothly and integrated. So I think that's really cool. And now we can transition to how Flatstack fits in with this. You have the investing sector with Voodoo Ventures, and you have your community building and your entrepreneurial touch point with LaunchPad. And how does Flatstack, the more technological software piece of it, fit into your overall strategy in business and life?
Well, you mentioned the word building software, and I think that's the common thread through all of these. A lot of companies do take capital to grow and build a company, and that's sort of the investing piece of it. Companies also take community. As an entrepreneur, there's a lot that can be lonely, and you need encouragement along that journey. And I think building community is what LaunchPad has always been about. And then Flatstack is just about building technology. Flatstack came about when I met the co-founders of Flatstack, Oleg, Alex, and Timur, over a marketplace called Elance. It's now called Upwork. More than 20 years ago. I met them in the year 2000, building my very first piece of technology. And they were based in Russia, in Kazan, where they are now. What I didn't realize at the time was they were high school kids. I was in my 20s, and here I had these high school juniors or seniors building my technology. But I always, I've always had the notion of just, what is the best way to get the job done? And I'm an engineer, but I'm not a computer scientist. And I needed to get my technology built, and found these guys, and they did a great job building it. And ultimately, I had people coming to me, a friend named Ryan Carson, who's built a company. He would, call me, and others would call me and say, hey, I hear you have these great engineers, how can I get access to them? And so Oleg and Alex and Timur and I decided to build this company. And it's been a 15-year plus journey. We've learned a lot along the way. I think that the skill and the talent of the engineers and the developers and the people we hire is something that I take a lot of pride in, and we've taken pride in. And we also have sort of run our business contrary to, there's probably a common thread through all these as well, a lot of contrarianism to kind of conventional wisdom or conventional thinking. But there's a notion that startups have to be built by engineers in Silicon Valley. And look, that is a great path, and there's a lot of companies that have been very successful that do that. But that's not possible for everyone. Not everybody lives in Silicon Valley. Not everybody has access to those engineers. Not everybody can afford that. And so we've believed strongly from the beginning that the world is flat, and great talent as well as great companies can come from anywhere and be built anywhere. And it's something that I think as a company that we all take a lot of pride in, that we've now have 15 years under our belt of really delivering great technology solutions, helping people build stuff. Back to the idea of building things, build very successful companies through this kind of global collaboration.
And with them, the developers building the software for you, being in another country, how did you build trust with them and make sure that they were building that trust and that security into your software?
Yeah, I think that it does require a leap of faith. The willingness to to build trust and to make an effort to build trust. It certainly is harder to do it, when somebody is in a different town, much less across the world, versus in the room right next to you. So I think that was a lot of what we focused on early and continue to focus on is, culture building. We very early on sort of defined our core values and worked on those together. And those became, sort of commonalities that we truly all believed in and committed to. And we communicated those to our clients and said, this is who we are, and this is what you're going to get from us. And we also have done a lot of cultural exchange. We've always liked to hire engineers and project managers who have some cultural familiarity with the US, where most of our clients are. Often have come for exchange programs in high school, so they understand sort of the cultures and traditions and ways we communicate here in the US. And so those are the types of things that we have done. I guess we also, just even in our approach to sort of engaging with clients, we have made an effort to build trust incrementally. We don't ask people to sign a big multi-year contract up front. In fact, we do work for people for free. That's been one of our most successful sort of marketing approaches, is just, hey, we'll do 20 hours of work for you for free. You can walk away. We do this thing called a test task. And really what customers don't always realize is it's actually a mutual evaluation, because we are evaluating the potential client to see if they know what they're talking about, if they have chops, if they are able to communicate online, because a lot of our communication obviously is online and written in virtual form and video. But that sort of no risk, hey, try before you buy, certainly helps build trust. And then our engagements have also been structured that way, monthly engagements. If it's not working, let's end it. A lot of agencies might lock you into a multi-year contract. We don't do any of that. If it's not working, let's move on. So those are, but it's a key point, sort of building trust along that way.
What's one of the key benefits to working with a team overseas? Something that I can think of immediately is they're working when you're sleeping. So you have the double work power load there. But what's something else that might be interesting that people haven't thought of when considering a software shop that's not US based?
Well, I was going to mention that. That's a great one, because you can really accelerate your productivity by having sort of work going on 24 hours a day. I think I think really the principal value of Flatstack is our talent and the quality of the engineers that we're able to hire. We are very intentionally in where we are in Kazan, the third largest city in Russia, because there's 30 some technical universities, graduating engineers. There's a great reverence in Russian society for math and science education, and so the skill of the engineers that we hire and can offer is really sort of unmatched. It's really a very talented group, and I think over the years, Timur, our CTO, has built an amazing culture, an amazing kind of education program where we have multiple levels, and you're moving up the ladder as you're maturing in your career, and so that's I think that's really what it boils down to is it's really the best, the most talented people we can possibly find, and you may be able to find a team like that in the US, and certainly if you're Google or Facebook or a big tech company in Silicon Valley, you probably can. But if you're most of everybody else, if you run a parking company, or you're in Canada, or you're building an oil and gas platform, you might not have access to those engineers, and your town may not have that type of a talent pool, and so that's I think that's the core benefit to working with us.
I think we're back. Okay. Right. One of my kind of last questions here for you, Chris, is you've worked with Flatstack as a client, and what did you learn from that experience exactly, working from that side and then eventually investing into the company later?
Yeah, I think that working as a client, and I've been a client with Flatstack multiple times. I first hired these guys as a client and built the very first company, the technology for the very first company I started. I also have worked with Flatstack over the years, as I mentioned earlier, in sort of incubating a company called Nico, and use Flatstack to build that. And I think it was a good experience because it's always good to be in your customer's shoes, and I very much was through this. I think that it is it's what I learned was how important it is to be prepared to communicate well what it is you want to build. And there are very rigorous ways of communication in sort of building software, and the more rigorous you are in doing that, the more successful you'll be. So everything from creating wireframes to developing user personas and user stories and acceptance criteria, and really following these established software methodologies that when I started they were new. Agile software development, they're not new anymore, they're more accepted, but your outcomes will be so different as a client if you come really equipped to actively participate as a client versus, here's my idea, I want to build an app like Uber and I want it to be for bikes, and go build it. And then you check out for a month and come back and say, all right, how'd you guys do? Right? That feedback loop has to be so tight. It's so important for the client to be engaged with us, throughout the process, and the outcomes and results, really demonstrate that. There have been times as a client where, I've gotten busy and haven't been able to, give my project manager feedback, and they're asking for stuff, and I'm, missing an action, and you come back and 2 weeks later and you say, okay, show me the demo, what'd you build? And it's not quite what your vision was. And the problem is you didn't actually communicate your vision, and you didn't sort of have this feedback loop along the way. You may have had in your mind's eye what you wanted to see, but unless you can truly communicate that in written, verbal, video form, there's all sorts of ways that you can communicate now. Even just sketching, I've found the most powerful thing for me when I am building software is literally drawing stuff on a whiteboard and taking pictures of it and sending it over. That's the best way for me to communicate. But that's one of the things, I mentioned the test task. I think that's one of the things that we as Flatstack are evaluating is how equipped is this potential client to be successful with us. Because that's probably one of the biggest differentiators. You mentioned, what are the advantages or disadvantages of working with Flatstack or any overseas firm. The way I would describe it is this: if you're going to work with any firm, they could be in your city or they could be halfway across the world. It doesn't matter. If you are not going to have somebody sitting with you, sort of pulling the idea out of you, you're going to stand side by side on the whiteboard and they're going to say, draw it up there and I will build that. Then you're going to have to find some way to communicate like we are right now virtually and get your idea across that way. And it doesn't really matter, like I said, if they're, if it's between Healdsburg and San Francisco, or if it's between Healdsburg and Kazan, you still need to be able to communicate in sort of a written and digital and virtual form. And that was, that's been one of the lessons to me, is the more skilled and prepared and committed you are as a client, that will drive the outcomes that you want.
Definitely. And I think you could say that across the board and any kind of projects that you work on, whether you're building a house, whether you're building software, building business, a relationship, being prepared is key, and will save you money in the long run, because if you're paying the contractor the hour, you don't necessarily want to waste time sitting around talking about what you might build or going off on tangents. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. I think maybe we should end on failure, because what is more important than our failures and being able to move forward? What is something in your career that has been shocking to you, that has been kind of a slap in the face, and where you've had to really pivot? And this might apply to Flatstack or Voodoo Ventures, or just one of those moments that has made you reconsider.
It's a very good question, and there's there's a
Through
lot.
all these flashbacks in your mind, and maybe I'm bringing some trauma
No,
that
I am.
might not want.
I'm trying to. I mean, I've had so many failures. I'm trying to figure out what story to tell. I can talk about failed investments. I can talk about failed businesses. I can talk about failed marriages. I won't talk about failed marriages, but I will say that going through a divorce, this all ties together. Going through a divorce and going through that process, and having the lawyer on the other side say, "You have 31 LLCs to your name. Something has to be a success," and say, "No, really, they were pretty much all failures."
That you're right.
That was there's plenty of them, but there's plenty of material, and every single one of them, there are lessons in, and there are things you learn, and I think that is important. That's a sort of a lifelong journey. But let's pick one.
Okay.
I think one of the things that one of my biggest failures. And not that it was, some earth, it was a failure to me. I don't think it was a huge letdown to the world that this doesn't exist, but I've mentioned it a couple of times, so I'll touch on it. It was a company called Nico. And I had a notion that this was back in sort of the early days of emojis and where we started communicating that way. And I had this notion that a very simple ability to track whether you're happy or sad, happy or angry, happy or upset, just a simple sort of smiley face would create a great feedback loop. And whether it's, a message to people at the end of the day and just say how are you feeling, message to clients saying how was this week, from our work at Flatstack, just a very, very lightweight thing. And I started to build the software, build the technology. Flatstack built it, and they did a great job building it. This was more about, certainly more about product market fit than was the technology there. But there were a lot of failures along the way, and I'll share some of those lessons. One was that I put way too much time into building something I thought the world needed before actually talking to the world. So this idea of sort of, release early and often, get it out there, don't overbuild before you're actually in front of people. I didn't do that. I probably, we were working on it for a year plus, maybe 2 years before we actually tried to get any customers. Then the other thing that was a real lesson to me was I had this notion, because as we've just gone through today, I do a lot, that I wouldn't be able to be CEO of the company, and I needed to put a team around it. And to me, that was probably the greatest failure, because it was my idea. I was the one initially passionate about it and committed to it and wanted to see it in the world. And I put a team around it of people that I really love and care about, and they were great people who worked for me, but they didn't care about it the way I did, and it wasn't their vision. And so I truly, the lesson from that to me was that, this idea of incubation, and actually, it's been tried in different forms, startup studios and incubators, but, you often have somebody who is doing exactly what I did. Like, I think this thing should work. I want to hire some people. I'll give them 5% of the company. I'll own 80% of it or whatever. I think that creating a great company and a company that is a world-changing company, a really successful company, the founding team has to be fully on board. It has to be their soul in the company, not just their idea, but their commitment, right? They need to be the ones that need to see this in the world. And that was just not true. These guys fought as hard as they could, but startups are hard, and we got into an accelerator program called LaunchPad. It's one of the top 3 accelerators in the country. They went through the whole program, 2 weeks from demo day, where they were going to pitch and potentially, raise millions of dollars and go on. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. They're going to be successful doing this. Everybody quit. And they decided to, it just, the wheels started coming off, and I realized that, they weren't passionate about it the way I was, and everything fell apart. And I think it's a failure. It was my failure. It wasn't their failure. It was a sort of a construct from the get-go that, in my view, was sort of built to spill. But that's a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of emotion went into to learning the lesson. So the lesson was a painful lesson, and that was probably one of my my greatest sort of business failures.
And how old were you when you learned this lesson?
I mean, it wasn't too long ago. Maybe almost 10 years ago. But I was in my in my 30s. So I certainly had been around the block enough, and sometimes you just feel like, oh, those other rules, they don't apply to me. I can pull this off. I can do this. But it ended up being sort of a universal truth that you really, to build a great company, the founders, it really needs to be their idea. And that's why, back to sort of the beginning of our conversation, at this point, I really believe that the best way to participate in the growth of a startup, if it's not going to be your startup, is to invest, write a check, be a part of it, be as supportive as possible, but get out of the way.
Good advice. We should end there. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you for being candid with me, Chris, and for sharing these stories. So it was good to talk to you.
You too, Lauren. This was a lot of fun today. Thank you.